Today we're talking knitting flops, specifically my knitting flops. And for me, this is basically pieces that I was super excited to knit. I couldn't wait to cast them on, finish them, wear them, and for whatever reason, they just didn't work out. So today I'm going to take you through my 5 most disappointing knits and what I learned from them. Welcome everyone to Goodknits. For those that are new here, I'm Sherry, a Canadian knitter living in Amsterdam. So I've been knitting quite seriously since about 2020, COVID years. And in that time, I've made a lot of knits that I absolutely love and still wear to this day. And I actually did a video recently on my all-time favorite knits. If you want to go check that out, I'll link it in the show description. But in that time, I've also made a lot of knits that just didn't work out. And I definitely have way more disappointing knits than I'm going to show here today. As I said in the intro, this is really the knits that I had real true excitement for. I really expected to love these pieces. And then in the end, they just didn't work out either, fit, color, yarn choice. So in all the knits I'm going to share today, I've learned so much from each of these pieces. And this is stuff that I have really taken into my knits. So in 2025, I would say I actually had my most successful year, not in terms of quantity of knits. It was actually one of my lower years, but just in terms of making pieces that I actually loved and wear. So I think the knitter that I kind of have become now in the last year is somebody that is much more intentional and thoughtful about the pieces that I make, the colors that I choose, how I'm subbing yarns. I'm constantly evolving and learning, and definitely I still make mistakes. But I do feel like each piece that I've made before this has taught me a lot. And now I really go into each new piece kind of having a checklist in my head of what I'm looking for. So if you're a knitter starting out and you're making pieces that maybe aren't quite working out, just see that for yourself as a learning experience, because we've all had it. We've all made knits that aren't perfect. And I think the silver lining there is that you take something away and learn from each of those experiences so that you can be a better knitter in the future. So for today's video, I'm going to go through 5 of the knits that I have personally found the most disappointing for me. And I'm going to share in detail my main issues with those pieces and what I've learned from them or would do differently in the future if I were to make that piece again. So keep in mind, these are my opinions about these pieces, and it simply comes down to, I think it's important that you feel good in what you wear. And when I put these particular knits on, I just don't feel great in them. They make me feel a bit self-conscious, and I don't want to feel that way when I'm wearing something that I've made. I want to feel proud. So even though these might look great on somebody else, they're just not working for me. So if you love them, that's great. I really appreciate that, but these are just the ways that I'm feeling about them. So I'm going to start kind of in the order of pieces that are almost close to perfect, but not quite there, and then go up to the pieces that I'm actually truly the most disappointed in. So the first sweater that I'm going to talk about is the Mohair Gallant Sweater by Kadri. I knit this in a size small. Hey, Ollie. And it is knit in the Woolfolk 4 yarn in the color aubergine, and this is a worsted weight yarn. Now, this is a bit of a unique flop because it is actually a sweater that I wear, but every time I put it on, I definitely am reminded of the issues that I have with it, and it is not a piece that I would make again in the way that I made it. So a little bit of a quick origin story on it. The reason that I made this sweater is I ended up buying the Woolfolk yarn when I went to Statement Junkie in Canada on a trip home. Now, I was not intending to buy this yarn, but Woolfolk yarn is very hard to get in Europe. It's very expensive, and I saw it. I am a sucker for a chain knit yarn sometimes. I really love the color, and so I bought it without any kind of plan, and I did not properly do math to calculate how much meterage I would need. So I only bought 6 skeins. They were quite expensive. They were about 18 euros a skein for, I think, 130 meters. And therefore I only ended up with just under 800 meters in yarn, which really limited what I could make with it. So I did a bunch of pattern searching. I'd already had this Gallant sweater on my list for a while, and I figured, okay, if I kept to a size small, I should be able to have enough to make this. So that's pretty much how I cast this on. There was very, very few garments that I could make, and I knew that I wanted to make a garment and not an accessory. that's kind of the context for how I ended up at this sweater. I didn't really think through, oh, how is this yarn going to behave when subbing out a mohair for a worsted weight chainette. I just kind of went for it and hoped for the best. So long story long, this yarn was a very poor sub for the mohair. This sweater is meant to have kind of this funnel neck that sits up and really can hold its shape, which the mohair would have been light enough that it would not sag. This chainette yarn is just, it stretches a lot. And so each time I wear it, it just gets lower and lower. And so the neck no longer sits up anywhere where it's supposed to be. It's basically just become a crew neck sweater. And that's really not the intent that I was going for. So for the price that I paid for this, because also, even though I figured, okay, I'm gonna have enough yarn to make this, I ended up in the end having to buy another skein, which was 35 euros. So we went from 18 euros when I bought it in Canada to 35 I had to buy from a company in Germany, just to be able to finish the sleeves on this. So also there was very little modifications I could do. This sweater has no shaping to it. There's no German short rows or anything. I knew with the meterage I had, I didn't even have an option to add short rows because I wouldn't have enough yarn. So I just went for it as it was. And in the end, actually the fit isn't that bad considering it has no shaping. It doesn't ride up even as bad as some of my sweaters that do. But yes, this yarn was just a terrible sub for this specific pattern. And so I learned a lot about really thinking through how your yarn is going to behave if you don't use the recommended fiber, the recommended yarn. Also, this Woolfolk 4 yarn pills like crazy. So, I mean, I spent around 150 euros on this piece in the end, and I have de-pilled this thing pretty much every single time that I've worn it. I didn't bother doing it before this video because I wanted you to see just how bad it is, but I think I de-pilled it 2 wears ago, and that's what it's looking like right now. So I actually think this sweater is not going to hold up for much longer. Just shedding and pilling every time I wear it. This is one of the most expensive sweaters that I've ever made, and I would expect at that price to love it. I would expect with that particular yarn that I would have loved it, even though it was a very basic pattern. And I just don't. So I do actually really like the pattern. I would say if you're a beginner knitter and you are looking for a very, very simple sweater, this one by Kadri is fantastic, well written. It's very easy. It looks great. It actually doesn't need a lot of shaping to look good. The increases are very simple. They're left and right leaning increases. So really like no complexity to this piece. And if I had just picked a different yarn, I think it would actually probably be one of my favorite knits. But it's one of those pieces where I almost wear it because I love the color. This aubergine color was identified in my color analysis as my power color. But the fit of it every time I wear it, I'm just like, I feel sloppy, I guess. I feel really sloppy when I wear it, and I don't like to feel that way. So even though I do pull it out once in a while, I wore it the other day just because the yarn itself is quite warm and it was very, very chilly, but I didn't feel great. So that is a disappointment, mostly because of yarn sub and yarn itself. And in general, as beautiful as that Woolfolk 4 yarn is, I have heard many other knitters talking about the pilling factor. And so just be mindful of that if you're gonna work with it. Maybe knit something that's not gonna be rubbing against stuff so much, like your arms, or if you have a purse on, because this yarn really doesn't hold up super well, and you are gonna need to maintain it. Then next up, we have my Ppoppo Jacket, which is a pattern by Aegyo Knit. I knit this in a size 1, and it's knit in the Lanagato VIP yarn in the color 13737, held with the Isayer mohair in the color 69. Now, this is a bit of a funny story because I fell in love with this pattern the second I saw it. I just really like that oversized, cozy look. I imagine myself just throwing this on over everything. And so it was on my list. I did a trip to Lithuania, to Vilnius, and I went to a yarn shop there and came across this Lanagato VIP yarn. Beautiful yarn, highly recommend it. So when I saw it, I figured that would be a really nice drapey yarn for this pattern. Now, where things kind of got complicated was the mohair that I paired it with. I originally bought the Cardigan Kid Seta in the color Red Panda, which was quite orange, but the yarn shop at the time didn't have anything super close to the Lanagato. I did my swatch. I really wasn't happy with it, so I kind of put aside the Red Panda and went on a hunt for a different mohair. I then ordered the Filcolana yarn in the color Antique Rose and got that swatched, and again, wasn't happy. It was way too light, much too pink. It just wasn't the look that I was going for. And so funny story, the Red Panda ended up being used for my cognac sweater because I needed something that didn't require a lot of mohair. And that Filcolana ended up becoming this Michaela sweater that I'm wearing, which is a pattern by Goodknits. So both of those kind of ended up being random casts on just to use the mohair that I had left over. Then I finally ended up on the third try with the proper mohair, and that was the Isayer mohair in the color 6-9. But it was pretty much a perfect match. So after 3 tries, finally got that right and was very excited to get this cast on. So where this becomes a flop is the overall fit. I looked at the pattern photos for this, and it really looks like in those photos, the back is hanging quite low. The front does ride up a little bit, so you end up with kind of this triangle sort of shape, but it really looks like that back panel is sitting quite low and it's going to fit over everything. That ended up not being reality. And so when I knit to the size 1 measurements, I was kind of questioning, I don't know if it's long enough. And rather than trusting my gut and doing a project block before binding off, I decided to just keep going. And the cast off for this one is quite complex because you are actually doing an I-cord finish around the entire body in one go. So you take your live stitches, you do your I-cord, you pick up along the sides, and you're working all the way around the entire piece. So this is not a bind off where you realize that you just need to add a few centimeters of length and you rip it back out and fix it. This is really one of those bind offs where, okay, it is what it is. You're probably not going to go back and fix it. This is why I should have done the block before I did that part, because I was expecting this moss stitch to grow a lot. It did, but it didn't grow lengthwise. It grew widthwise. The sleeves really expanded. The sleeves also got longer because the top part weighs itself down, but the length did not grow. So I ended up blocking this thing twice, and in the end just couldn't get to the length that I wanted, and there was no way that I was going back to fix it. So you're gonna see in the video that when I'm wearing this, if I'm wearing it where it's supposed to properly sit on my shoulders, the back is quite high, so you can always see the shirt underneath. And if I tuck it, then you can tell that my shirt's tucked in. If I kind of pull it back a little bit so it sits lower down the back part of my shoulder, the length does look more like the pattern photos. However, then the front has this very weird shape to it, and the kind of 2 triangle pieces are just sitting at your bust basically. So the fit on this one is very strange. I really wanted it to be that cozy jacket feel that I just put on over literally everything and kind of lounged around in or wore to the office. I do wear it once in a while, but again, it's every time I wear it, I am disappointed and I'm fussing with it. And I don't want to have pieces where I constantly have to be adjusting them while I'm wearing them. That drives me crazy. And for the most part, the pieces that I buy in stores, I don't have to do that with. And so when I'm knitting something, this is a big reason why fit this year is so important to me. And I really want to learn what modifications I need to make so things fit my body properly, because I don't want to be adjusting things. I don't want to be fussing with them and feeling self-conscious while I'm wearing the piece, or being like, okay, I have to tuck something underneath so that you can't see the back. It's just not how I want to feel in my knits. So I do love the color of this one. It really makes me happy. The Lanagato VIP is fantastic yarn. It's a cashmere blend. I highly recommend it. It's also very well priced. So if you get your hands on that, definitely buy it. And it really was a good fit for this piece because of the drape factor. But I think, I don't know, maybe the pattern photos in this one were a bit misleading. Or maybe even I should have knit the size 2. Maybe I should have just knit a size up. But yeah, it just didn't work out. So I've definitely learned from this project and others that if I'm ever questioning the final fit, length, how something's gonna block, I just stop what I'm doing, I block the piece, and make sure that I feel comfortable before I continue. Because really, the worst thing is that you finish something and it doesn't fit, and then you have to go back, or you can't even go back and fix it. Better to know that earlier so that you can try to make adjustments. And that's really the best that you can do. Then we have blouse number 2 by My Favorite Things Knitwear, and I knit this in the Drops Cotton Merino in the color 8, which is marine blue, in a size small. So this starts to get into multiple issues. You know, the other ones were kind of yarn, then fit. This one has yarn, fit, design details. There's a lot happening here. So I would say the biggest thing here is the overall design and fit on me. This is kind of a piece that I probably should have realized before I even made it. Maybe it's not quite my style. Doesn't really go with anything else that I wear. And it has more of that bohemian aspect that I don't tend to gravitate towards. But seeing all the pattern photos, I don't know, it just looked interesting. And I think at the time I just wanted to make something that was a bit fun and different for me. And I wasn't really thinking through, how is this going to work on me and how's it going to work in my wardrobe? I also at this time, going through my Ravelry, seemed to have a bit of a eyelet phase. So I'd also modified a Tolsta tee that Kelly from Coco and Knits did, where she has these eyelet stripes. I saw her version, she did 2 of them actually, and I really, really liked it and decided to make it for myself. And I ended up not liking the Tolsta on me either. So this eyelet design, just not really my thing. Then the other issue. So this is meant to be knit in I think a Rama Petunia yarn, which is 100% cotton Pima. And it's a DK weight. And I don't know if you've ever used like We Are Knitters cotton yarn. It's quite heavy, like it's a very substantial summer weight yarn. And I ended up subbing mine out for the Drops Cotton Merino DK, I think mostly due to price, but also I expected maybe if it had that merino in it, it was going to feel a little bit lighter. It didn't. So this yarn was a pain to work with. It was very splitty. In general, I wouldn't recommend this yarn. I did not like the experience, but it also, just being a DK weight cotton yarn, was very heavy. And so when I finished this piece and I tried to wear it, I just really didn't like the way it felt on my body. So already with the overall styling of it, then paired with the yarn weight and the design details, it just wasn't a great combination. And so in the end, I wore it once. I think also this marine blue is not really my color. It actually doesn't sit in my autumn color palette. And I didn't feel like I really shone when I wore it, but I wore it out one day in the fall after I finished it, and that was the last time I put it on. So in one of my wear test videos, I believe I just ended up saying, hey, you know, I'm not gonna wear this thing. It's like a 1 out of 5 for me. I'm really unhappy with it. If anybody wants it, either for the yarn or for themselves, they can have it, let me know. Thankfully, a lot of people were really interested in it, so I ended up sending it to a viewer who I believe kept it intact, and hopefully it has looked a lot better on them. But I think it's just one of those pieces where eyelets, for whatever reason, don't suit me. I don't like them. And the color, the yarn, and maybe I should have known this because it's like I was so excited for it when I cast it on, then I lost some steam, so I ended up running a cowl as a way to motivate myself to finish this thing. And even then I was down to, I think, the last day of this cowl that I was running to try to wrap this piece up. And when I finished it, I kind of already knew this is just not something that I'm going to actually wear. So I did try, and I have since stopped working with eyelets. If they're in a shawl, great, that's perfect. But on a pattern itself, unless there is a very like subtle detail, maybe on an arm or a neckline or a hem, it's not really a detail that I'm going to be seeking out in patterns going forward. And I will definitely question if that's the right pattern for me if I think about knitting something like this again. So I think the blouse number 1 would have been a much better fit on me, but the blouse number 2, very similar design, but definitely different yarn, different details, didn't work out. Then the 4th pattern, we have the Braidy Loop cardigan by Other Loops. I knit this also in a size small in the Assayer Jensen yarn held with mohair, both in the color 2S. So this is a case again where we're getting into color, fit, final details, but also cost again. This was a garment where I had this Braidy Loop cardigan saved from the first moment that I saw it on Instagram. I was patiently waiting for this pattern to come out. I think I was messaging the designer saying, hey, when do you expect this to come out? I can't wait to cast it on. There was just something about this cardigan that instantly took me. And I think this piece photographs beautifully. So even when I look at photos of me in this, I'm like, wow, that looks great. I love that piece. The cables are perfect. It just looks really polished and beautiful. But this really is a piece that I put on my body, and without even looking in the mirror, I just feel frumpy. I do not feel good when I put this on. Now, definitely the color on this was not working in my favor. I had this phase where I was really knitting everything, especially cardigans, in this icy white gray color, which is not at all in my autumn palette. It completely washes me out. I don't feel good in this color. But I think my rationale on this was I wanted a neutral. I wasn't loving the options for the Jensen yarn, but it was new to me. I wanted to try it. I didn't want to sub it out. So I ended up saying, oh, you can never go wrong with a gray cardigan. Or actually, I think I'd been wanting more of a true gray, and this was the closest to it. But yeah, my thinking, you can't go wrong with a gray cardigan, so this will be great. I will get so much wear out of this. And definitely the Jensen yarn was nice, paired with the mohair. It adds a lot of dimension and texture. I would definitely work with the yarns again, just not in this color. So we already went wrong from the start with the color choice. Now let's talk about the fit. So this is a saddle shoulder design, which was so much fun to knit. So also this pattern is great if you just really want a different construction method. I really love the process of knitting this, seeing it grow, working that cable. It was fun. So A+ for that. But I find in this heavier weight yarn with the cabling and the details, the saddle shoulder, it tends to add some bulk to the top of your body. So I'm not really broad-shouldered. It's not something that I worry too much about in terms of shoulder fit and the upper body. But I do find that this specific construction with the cabling adds some extra bulk to the top of me that I don't love. Then the overall length of this is quite a bit longer than I would usually wear in a cardigan. If I thought that through, I could have easily just cropped it and made it a bit shorter, but I didn't. I added the button band, and I think really in the end, the button band is probably my biggest issue with this. So the pattern calls for a 1x1 rib button band. That's what I did. It was, I believe, the first time, that I had worked a button band. And so I didn't really feel confident swapping it with the double knit button band because I'd never done it before. A lot of people did recommend that I do that. I didn't listen. And so I got the whole thing done. I put the buttons on. Originally, I put them on too tight, so it started to pull and really distort the band itself. I took the buttons back out. I redid them with, I forget what it's called, but I wrapped yarn around the base of the back so that it had more space and wasn't stretching so much. And I tried to block out with a steamer before I put those on. the button band so it would go back to being straight. At that point though, I think it had already stretched so much that there wasn't really any saving it. So you will see in the video and pictures, the button band looks really, really sloppy on this, which probably just contributes to this frumpy factor every time I put it on. And of course, I could go in and redo the button band. I could rip the whole thing out. I could reknit as a double knit button band. And if that was my only issue with it, I would do that. But I've been thinking on this one. I don't love the color. I don't like the overall length. I don't like the button band. And just in general, I'm not loving the fit on me. So even if I fix the button band, or even if I crop the length, or if I dye it, all those things individually are not going to fix it. And to do all three of those things in my very limited knitting time, I don't know. This might be an unpopular opinion, but it just doesn't seem worth it to me. And it's just one of those pieces where I'm not super excited to have it anymore. I like the look of it still. I see pictures and I'm really drawn to it, but I'm kind of over it at this point. And so I tried to wear it a couple times. Truth be told, this entire winter, I haven't worn it once. I put it on one day and was like, ugh, yeah, I don't feel good. So I took it right off. And I'm trying to decide now what to do with it. The other issue on this is definitely one of the most expensive pieces I've ever made. So I think the yarn in the end was 155, 160 euros. That's a lot of money for me for a cardigan. I wouldn't usually spend that much. And I thought about ripping it out and using the yarn for something else. But again, then I'm like, don't I need to dye it because I don't really like the color. So I don't know what to do with this one. I don't know if I want to give it away for the cost of the yarn or just hold on to it and then try to make a decision later. But I can't quite decide on this one. So I don't know what your thoughts are, but yeah, it's such a shame because I do like the look of this, and it's definitely one of the more complicated pieces I've ever made. I wanted to love it so much. I just don't. But I definitely learned to, for future cardigans, always go with a double knit button band. Do not just do the ribbing. It really doesn't look as nice. And so I will always put in that extra effort to do it properly, even if the pattern doesn't call for it. And there's lots of great videos for how to do double knit button bands online. So I should have just done that from the beginning. And yeah, if other knitters give you that kind of advice before you make something, maybe take it. And then the final, most disappointing knit that I've ever made is my Salty Day Sweater by Ppoppo, which I knit in a size small in the Durarum Naturum Gilead yarn in the color Gallant. Where to begin on this pattern? So many things went wrong. So this is probably one of the patterns I have been the most excited to knit in all my years of knitting. You know, this is a gorgeous pattern. It's knit kind of in different sections. Each design section is its own piece within the pattern. So you also feel like, oh, I finished section 1, now I'm on section 2, then 3. It's very potato chippy in the sense of you always feel like you're accomplishing something, like it's a gamified pattern almost. So this was really fun. It ended up going really fast. Now, what went wrong on it? I think the biggest thing is I decided to do a yarn sub on this. Everything really went wrong from that moment because this called for a DK weight yarn held with a mohair for a worsted weight. And all of the yarns that are called for in the pattern and what most people used were just 100% merino yarns, which tend to be a softer feel. They are plied yarns and they just have a really nice drape to them, especially with the mohair. They're a little bit lighter. I was really over mohair at this point when I was making it, and I had a very strong opinion that I only wanted to hold a yarn single. I didn't know a whole lot about woolen spun versus worsted versus plied and all of it. And I still don't know a lot about this. So when I've had to research, okay, why did this yarn sub not go well for me? I've really had to look into it and educate myself a bit more. So The merinos that were called for were plied yarns. They would have held the texture a lot better. I went for a semi-woolen spun worsted yarn that is carded, and therefore it has this kind of textured property to it. It's a little bit fuzzier, and in general it just doesn't really hold the texture as well. And feel free to correct me as much as you want in the comments. I'm still learning. The whole fiber subbing thing is still a topic that I'm learning a lot about. So I made a poor decision with my yarn sub. I definitely could have decided to do a worsted weight yarn without the mohair and maybe gone for more of a merino, and it would have probably been okay. But just the specific yarn that I picked was not a good decision. Then we have the color. So I think I made this before the Braidy Loop cardigan, and I was like, oh, I really want a nice basic gray sweater in my wardrobe. This is perfect. Yeah, this gray is horrible on me. It completely washes me out. I don't know what I was thinking. It's just, I still was in this mindset that gray looks good on everybody, and the reality is that it doesn't, and it doesn't look good on me. So there, yarn and color, not off to a great start. Then we get into gauge. So I gauge swatched on 5mm needles, which is what the pattern called for. I didn't stretch the original swatch too much, and it ended up being too small. So I knitted on a 5.5mm needle, did a gauge swatch, and then was like, oh, I don't know, is it now too big? And at this point I would say I still didn't really fully understand the purpose of a gauge swatch and what you should be careful about. So I decided to go back and re-wet block my original 5mm swatch and just stretch it really aggressively, which you should never do. Really, you should just wet block and then put it out, lay it flat, pin it, and really not stretch it too much, because your gauge swatch is going to behave differently probably than your final piece, especially if you're only doing the recommended 10x10, 4x4, however you measure. So I somehow made the decision that rather than doing the 5.5mm needles, which actually probably would have achieved the proper gauge, I was going to knit this at the 5mm and then just stretch it a lot. So I cast this thing on, I worked pretty much the entire body and started to think to myself, this looks really small. Like, this sweater is meant to have 15 to 20 centimeters of positive ease, and I don't feel like it does. So I was very close to casting off the body, decided to do a mid-project block. So I did that in this case, and this was before the Ppoppo Jacket. And I stretched it very, very aggressively, which, again, bad decision. But so I stretched this thing, I measured it, was like, okay, it seems to hit gauge. I'm just gonna go ahead and finish the body and move on to the sleeve. What I also should have done is probably used a bigger needle size for the twisted rib finishings, because those things are so tight and it's very hard to aggressively stretch twisted rib. So you'll see in probably the videos or photos, it really cinches in at the bottom in a very awkward way. So you can tell that I really aggressively tried to pull out the body of it, but the hem really cinches in. So I finished the piece and did the neckline, and the neckline is meant to be quite low sitting. So I would say like closer to the fit of this Michaela sweater. It's meant to really hang a little bit and be thicker. It was again twisted rib. And I blocked this thing, I put it on, and I could barely get the neckline over my head. So first sign that it wasn't really working out. And originally, I will say I wore this quite a lot when it first came off my needles. I was really proud of it. I was like, oh, I made a salty day sweater. Like, this is great. This is probably the most intricate piece that I've ever made. And I expected to be getting so many compliments on it. And then I started to look at pictures that I'd taken wearing it, or I'd look in the mirror and realize I look like I'm wearing a shrunken sweater. Like every time I was wearing it, I was constantly pulling at the sleeves, trying to get the cuff to stay at my wrist line. I was constantly pulling the bottom down, trying to stretch this thing out while I'm wearing it. I was always like trying to pull the neckline down. And if you're doing that, it definitely signals that there is a fit issue. So in the end, this ended up much closer to a size extra small than a small. I have about 12 centimeters of positive ease. I was originally expecting closer to the 20 centimeters that the pattern recommended. So yeah, it doesn't drape the way that I want because of the yarn itself. The color washes me out. And then on top of it, it just looks very, very small for my particular frame. So it's a beautiful sweater. I think in its current state, it would work on somebody else. I did originally plan to frog this piece and reuse the yarn for something else and then just maybe dye it. But again, I only have so many knitting hours working a full-time job, and I just don't know if I want to spend the time ripping this thing apart, rewinding it, and then making something else, and then knowing that I have to dye it to make sure that I'm actually going to wear it. And I actually don't have a huge amount of yarn for this, so even if I had knit it at the correct size, I definitely would have run out of yarn because I was playing yarn chicken by the end. So for me, I think this is probably going to be a piece where I end up giving it away. Again, maybe for the cost of yarn, I haven't quite decided. Realistically, I just don't think, well, there's no saving this particular piece. The only option would be to take it all apart and either re-knit it or use the yarn for something else. But I'm not sure that that's how I want to spend my time. So that for me is definitely the most disappointing knit, simply because I was also the most excited for it. And when I see other people's, I still love this pattern. Maybe one day I'll re-knit it with the correct yarn. But yeah, it just didn't go as planned. What I will say though, I do like the Durarum Naturum Gilead yarn. I would just probably use it for something else. So maybe also like a Miles shirt jacket or something, heavier weight, like really sturdy, I guess. I think it would be a great yarn for that, but this particular pattern, it just wasn't a great sub. But like I said, it taught me a lot. These pieces have taught me to be more careful about color, be very mindful when you're subbing out yarns, trust your gut more, make sure that you're doing mid-project blocks or adjusting things that don't feel right, like button bands, and to just look at construction method and what's actually going to work on my body. So it's okay that these pieces didn't work out. In some cases, I do still wear them. In other cases, they have just been put away, but that's the life of a knitter. We're always going to make stuff that we're not 100% happy with, but I think it's what you do with that information, and maybe it is worthwhile to go back and change pieces, and definitely that is something that I've been doing more of. So now when I'm not happy with something, but overall the piece is something that I do really love, like my Sabai sweater where I wasn't happy with the hem, or my Montpellier slipover where I modified and I knit too short of a neck and then realized it didn't work out. In those cases, if I'm pretty sure that the modification I make is actually going to help me wear that piece, I'm making a very concerted effort now to go back and make those fixes and try to make them as soon as I can after I finish the piece so that I'm motivated to do it. So it is a focus for me now, but only in cases where I think that that fix is actually going to make the difference. If it doesn't, then it's time to decide how I want to proceed from there. I still haven't fully decided on these ones, but yeah, I think, I still found a lot of great yarns. I definitely learned a lot, and I've taken that into my future knits. So those are my biggest flops. I'd love to know from you which knits haven't worked out for you and why. What have you learned and are taking into your future knitting? And if you like to hear about my biggest flops, then I'm sure you're going to like to hear about my favorite knits. So make sure that you go check out that video on my all-time favorite winter knits. And if you like to hear these kind of reviews, I also do a series called The Wear Test. I think I've done 3 or 4 of them now. I'll link to that playlist in the show description. And that's where I go back and look at all the recent knits that I've made and let you know how I'm liking them, if I'm wearing them, what I would change if I'd make them again. So that's a really fun series. I am hopefully going to be recording a new one shortly now that I have a few more pieces to talk about. But in general, as a knitter, I really like to go back and analyze what I've made and what I've learned from it and take that into my future knits. So if you enjoy that kind of content, I hope you'll stick around. You can expect to find a lot of that here. And as always, thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next video.